If you would like to earn CPE credit for listening to the show, visit earmarkcpe.com/FPA. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Finally, if you enjoy listening to FP&A today, please go to your podcast platform of choice, click the subscribe button, and leave a rating and review of the show. And now, on to the show.
From Data Rails, this is FP&A Today.
Hello, and welcome to FP&A Today, brought to you by Data Rails. I am Glenn Hopper, and I'm excited to be your new host. Today, we're joined by Tory Bauman. Tory is a CPA who serves as the Vice President of FP&A at Zayo, a global telecom and internet backbone provider. Anytime you've sent a message or made a phone call, it likely involves Zayo Network. Their 6.8 million miles of fiber spans an impressive 141,000 route miles. Tory started her career as an auditor at KPMG. Actually, Tory, it's probably better if I let you tell your story than me reading your bio here. Can you walk us through your career and tell us how you got to your current role?
I'm an accountant by education. I graduated from the University of Denver and went to work at KPMG as an auditor in the Denver office. I spent only a couple of years there in their TMT sector, so telecom, media, and tech. I worked on some clients that a lot of people may recognize: Stars, the TV show producing company, Liberty Global, Liberty Media. Zayo was also kind of an up-and-coming large client of Zayo's, and I saw that they were doing a lot of exciting things there. They were highly acquisitive back in the 2000s and 2010s. So that means, a lot of debt raises. The auditors are very involved in those with the requirements and the reporting. So I actually requested to be on that team. A place like Stars, the audits can get pretty mundane. You have your number of subscribers and your cost per subscriber that they're paying for the service, and that equals your revenue. So the audit was not super complex. And I thought Zayo, may be a good experience for me. At the time, I thought I wanted to go into transaction advisory at either a big four or one of the big, large advisory firms. And I thought it'd be a good segue. I was on the Zayo audit, went through their initial IPO actually in 2014 as an auditor. And then about a year later, I jumped ship and went to work for Zayo. So a little bit of a change in what I thought I would be doing after my short career in audit, but glad I made that move.
Yeah, so that's, you and I have that in common. My first finance job was at a CLEC back in the early 2000s. And like Zayo, we were highly acquisitive. I think in the 4 years or so that I worked in finance there, I think we did 7 transactions, and they were all kind of mergers of equals. And it was really that just the M&A became a full-time job. Coming out of the audit background and going straight into M&A as you were there, were you involved in the due diligence early on? Were you involved in the M&A process?
My first role with Zayo was a manager of SEC reporting. As part of that, we worked closely with technical accounting on the valuations post-close, the purchase accounting valuations. And so I wasn't necessarily involved in the front end right away while I was at Zayo. Once the deal was signed, figuring out, how are we going to account for this transaction? What's the purchase accounting valuation? What do we need to report to the SEC? So I got a lot of experience there. I mean, Zayo is a really exciting company to be at and to follow. It's a amalgamation of 47 acquisitions, pre-go private. And so it's really special, taking 47 essentially fiber network companies and putting them all together is no small feat. It's not something that can be replicated today. There's not 47 fiber companies out there that could be rolled up to create this network. So it's been a pretty unique story, and it's been fun to be a part of. After I was in SEC reporting and a little bit in technical accounting, I actually moved into an operational accounting role. I was the assistant controller of one of our business segments. That comes with the monthly close and analysis there on the accounting side. But also every time we do an acquisition, figuring out how we're going to integrate that new company's data into ours, how are we going to get their AP into our AP system and things like that. So I've gotten to see that acquisition piece kind of from all angles between accounting and finance, which has been nice. Moving onto the finance team, it's definitely getting involved a little bit more on the front end before acquisition close. Does this make sense? How much do we think we should be paying for this acquisition? Looking at their contracts and things like that, trying to figure out what synergies we can achieve once they come on board is a big component kind of on the finance side that was a little bit different than what I had started in over in accounting.
Absolutely. And that's my first real exposure in my career journey to really identifying metrics and understanding maybe on a deeper level. What they mean is when you're trying to integrate the metrics, because different companies may measure the same thing in different ways. So really learning what those metrics are. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, here at FP&A today, we're very practical. So we always want to know how your FP&A team is set up, what your main KPIs are that you're tracking, and kind of what are the metrics that your CFO wants to know on a daily basis. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is not unique to many organizations, but we've been through a lot of reorganizations within our business, not only with, the way that our business units are structured, but also the way our finance team is structured, just to try to reach an optimal state. How efficient can we be and how can we be best supporting the rest of the business? So today we are organized largely by business unit. We have 4 major business units and there's leaders for each of those business units. And so we measure them from kind of top line KPIs all the way down through contribution margin. And then we've got our kind of other half of the FP&A team is focused on headcount and SG&A by cost center. So they're aligned to each cost center. Each executive leader here at Zayo, has a cost center budget. And so our analysts work with them on how they're going to achieve that, what that should look like. I think from a KPI standpoint, we're really focused on driving top line growth. And so we have a couple key leading indicators that tell us how well we're doing and what we should expect from a revenue growth standpoint. And we operate in a recurring revenue model, right? Which means when we sign on a customer, we get recurring monthly revenues from them until they cancel service. And so we really focus on our sales bookings, which tells us how much is our monthly recurring revenue going to increase, what new revenue is under contract, essentially, that now is in our pipeline to go install. So once we have our booking, it sits in our service activation pipeline, and then we measure our installs. So that would be the day we turn on service and we can start billing the customer. So those are super important for growing that top line revenue. And then we also monitor our churn really closely. So how well are we doing from a revenue retention standpoint? We'll report churn as soon as a customer says, hey, I want to disconnect. A lot of times there's a 30 or 60 day notice period in there for them to let us know, hey, I want my service turned off. We live and breathe those every day. We're sending weekly forecast updates on those metrics to our investors, our owners. Some other important metrics include cash flow. So how are we doing from a cash flow standpoint on a weekly basis? The cost of capital has increased over the last several years, and cash flow and liquidity is definitely top of mind for a lot of companies, especially in telecommunications. It's a really highly capital intensive business. We need to spend a lot of money to maintain and build new assets in order to grow top line revenue. So cash flow is super important and capital allocation is really important. So are we being good stewards of our capital? Are we earning an appropriate return on that capital? What's our return on invested capital is a huge metric that we look at to make sure that we are deploying capital in the right places. I mean, we spend almost $1 billion a year on capital investments in our network.
You're giving me flashbacks to my days in telecom, and I'm thinking some of the earliest, more complicated models I built in my career were on trying to predict churn. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, because that is an important part of the business, what's your approach to forecasting churn and how complex is that modeling?
It's something that we spend a lot of time and energy on because it is so important, and we want our customer retention to be as high as possible. It costs a lot more to sign up a new customer and turn on their service than it does to just retain our existing customer base. We actually have a whole team that's dedicated just to churn management, and they run a predictive model that they've built with the help of IT that kind of shows, what products and services are most at risk, what customers are at risk. It looks at the customer health index the sales team helps manage to figure out, are we at market pricing when their contract comes up? Are we going to see a re-rate where we have to give them a discount on the service? Are they going to leave and go somewhere else that maybe has a lower rate if the customer is really focused on price? That's something that, they're monitoring on a daily basis. A lot of different factors and inputs go into that model. So price is obviously one of them, the type of product they're on, the customer vertical that they're in, the market they're in. So it is something we spend a ton of time on and something that we've tried to automate as well. So that predictive churn model is really it's an AI-based model based on a lot of different data feeds to try to predict where we're going to see our churn coming from.
Because you're using AI and because you're constantly updating models and forecasts, I want to talk about how you do your budgeting and forecasting. But before that, give me an overview of your team setup within FP&A.
Yeah, so we have a middle management layer, essentially a director layer that sits over the business units and the cost centers. And then we have analysts layer 1, 2, and 3 that kind of support that. So typically we'd like to have an analyst dedicated per business unit or per cost center. So the owner of that spend kind of has one person to interface with. That person can really understand that business unit and get really deep into, what are the relevant KPIs for that business unit? Is it a growing product or is it maybe a declining product? We've got dark fiber and waves. Those are huge growth products for us. Whereas maybe Ethernet, has seen a lot of price compression. We still think we can grow the volume, but we're competing on price a lot of the times. And so as the price works down, we need to exceed our sales from a volume standpoint to maintain that revenue. And so it's really important for us to align the analysts in a way that they can get super familiar with the business that they're responsible for doing the planning and analysis for and really get ingrained in the business. It also helps from a retention standpoint and a development standpoint, we've found. We've been in a model before where we've been aligned by P&L bucket. So, we've had revenue analysts and expense analysts. It's really hard for them to grasp the concept of how the business is working and why we're doing what we're doing. And they tend to get really stuck on kind of just the P times Q, reporting the weather versus really digging down into what's driving the variance. I think it's a lot more exciting for an analyst to kind of get into a business unit, really understand how it operates both from a revenue and a cost standpoint, and doing the analysis that way to help them understand, really what the drivers are. And it makes for a better analysis and a happier team.
That's been my experience completely. By embedding your team members within the certain groups, it really drives the business partnering. But it also, whether it's BI or FP&A or data science teams, so they've got the central report that they go up to, and they report to a domain expert in finance and accounting, but they really understand the team better. And that model, it sounds like you've seen the exact same thing, where having them embedded in the team really helps with business partnering. With that business partnering and with the embedding and seeing that the level of understanding that your team gets by being embedded in there, what would you say is your best secret to finance business partnering? Like, what are you seeing they're embedded in there, and what else are you seeing that really enhances that partnership?
I think if you asked me a few years ago, I would say communication. But I think what it really actually is alignment. And what I mean by that is, you could be communicating well and often, have a good relationship with your business partner. But we found that sometimes you can be saying the same thing, but mean something totally different. And so making sure that you're getting to the point of alignment where both parties are interpreting the mandate or the ask the same way, aligning on it, and then moving forward. You don't always have to agree on it. And a lot of times you're not going to get agreement between finance and the business units, but you have to get alignment on it before you can go try to execute it. Anyone in finance or anyone in business who works with a finance team has been pushed on targets and has said that I can't hit that target. That's a stretch for me. I don't want to put that in my budget. And at the end of the day, whether it's your owners or your CEO, your CFO, a lot of times teams will get stretched, and that additional target will go into your budget. And so making sure that you're aligned on what the target is. Maybe you don't agree on what it is, but at least both teams know that this is the target. And then, okay, what are we going to go do to hit that target? How can finance support the business unit in that to move forward and execute?
Walk me through annual budget process and how frequently you're redoing forecasts and sort of how you go about doing that and I would imagine with the business partnering, it's a lot of bottoms up kind of stuff. Walk me through that process.
From an annual budgeting standpoint, we start that kind of early in the fourth quarter. We work with the business unit leaders, the cost center owners. What's the strategy for next year? Where do we think the business should be going? What resources do we think we need to support that growth? And then doing a bottoms up to figure out where the gaps are, if there are any. That process does take basically the whole quarter. Towards the end of the quarter, we go to our equity sponsors and our board for budget approval. Sometimes there's back and forth what the target should be, or we'll get stretched on some of the targets, which I think is very common, especially if you're in a private equity backed company. And then from a forecast perspective, we do a forecast refresh once a quarter. So once we close the books on a quarter, we'll look at, hey, what are our gaps to our budget? Where do we need, what initiatives do we have in place to close those gaps? Is there any pivot in strategy that's based on maybe macro tailwinds that we need to consider to update the forecast? And we look at an 18-month rolling view. So every time we're updating that forecast, we're going out 18 months. And so by the second quarter of any given year, you already have a full annual view of the following year, which sets you up well when you get to that fourth quarter. You've already been paying attention to the next year. People aren't surprised, by what the targets are. They already have kind of a sense based on our long-term plan, what they're going to be expected to do the following year and what the trajectory of the business is. So I think outside of just the annual budgeting and the forecasting process, it's been really important for us to work on that kind of 5-year strategic plan with our investors and our board to make sure, we're aligned on what the strategy is, and we're aligned on maybe what the exit target is 5 years from now. Where do they expect us to be from a revenue EBITDA standpoint? How much capital do we have available to spend to kind of drive that growth, and fit all those pieces together to make sure that, we're doing the right things today to achieve that 5 years down the road.
Mike Tyson said, that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. You've got your 18-month view of where you want to go. And then, as reality meets the model, and you'll have your puts and takes with the forecast refresh every quarter. Do you talk a lot about the levers that you need to pull to change things if you're off? How much is FP&A involved in those conversations?
We are very involved in those conversations. We lead a lot of those conversations with our business unit leaders, our executive leadership team, anyone who really is responsible for spend at Zayo. A goal of ours is to grow our top line organically, right? If we don't achieve some of those growth targets, it definitely puts a squeeze on how much we can then go spend. And so we meet on a weekly basis with our CFO, our CTO, our chief sales officer, our president, on just what are our big deals in the funnel, and what's kind of our capital envelope that's available, what returns are we expecting. And so as we get deeper into the year and we're comparing our top line growth to the budget, our capital spend to the budget, our expenses versus budget, what is EBITDA looking like, we're having those conversations during those meetings to say, hey, if we sign on this customer, we're committing to spend another $100 million over the next 18 months on this project. Is that something that fits into the plan or doesn't? Do we need to adjust our pricing? Do we need to walk away from some deals that maybe aren't the best return? We either price ourselves out on purpose, or we just back away from the deal because it's not the right fit for Zayo at the time. And we're lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that. We do that today, and we're still able to grow our top line. So I think, there's enough addressable market out there for us to go get. In telecom today, a lot of our competitors face challenges that Zayo doesn't necessarily have. We don't have declining revenue streams like legacy MPLS services or voice products that people don't necessarily use today. So I think we're set up in a position to be able to do that and make those tough choices and pull those levers. And we've had to do that in the past. Things don't always go according to plan. They almost never go according to plan. And so kind of knowing what those levers are, knowing that we'll have to pull them is something that we talk to the business about a lot. We give them signaling ahead of time to say, hey, if this happens or we don't hit this metric, this is the lever that we're going to have to pull. So they understand, what the mandate is from a growth standpoint, and kind of what the consequence is really if we don't hit that, what that cascades to for the rest of the business. So no one is surprised when we get to that point.
FP&A Today is brought to you by DataRails, the world's #1 FP&A solution. DataRails is the artificial intelligence-powered financial planning and analysis platform built for Excel users. That's right, you can stay in Excel. But instead of facing hell for every budget, month-end close, or forecast, you can enjoy a paradise of data consolidation, advanced visualization, reporting, and AI capabilities. Plus game-changing insights giving you instant answers and your story created in seconds. Find out why more than 1,000 finance teams use data rails to uncover their company's real story. Don't replace Excel, embrace Excel. Learn more at datarails.com. A unique thing about Zayo is formerly public, taken private. So I'm sure different budget demands and requirements, whether it's from the PE sponsors or public markets. But I would imagine, having seen both sides of that at the same company, that you've probably had quite a few challenging, I guess, for lack of a better word, budget experiences. Is there one that really stands out to you as the most painful, the most that you learned the most from, that was really tough to get through?
Just a couple of years ago, we were at a point where our CFO had actually resigned. Our senior vice president in finance had resigned, and it was, November, December timeframe, peak of annual budgeting. And, all the numbers are starting to come together. We're starting to look for approval from our board and our investors. And, as we're getting the bottoms up budgets from a lot of our business units and cost centers, and we're looking at our cash flows, we really were in a spot 18 months in the future where we didn't want to be from a liquidity standpoint. And so there's a lot of work where we had to go back and figure out, if we continue at our current course and speed, we will not like where we are at 18 months from now. So first, messaging that to the leadership team and the board and the investors can be tough. You don't want to be the person with your hair on fire, getting everybody excited about something that needs a little bit more work. But it did kick off a lot of work streams in terms of evaluating how much capital are we really spending and what are those returns looking like, and where can we cut back on that capital spend while still growing revenue. We also looked at kind of our operating expense buckets. Where can we optimize our expenses? Can we groom our network to get out of some fiber leases? From an SG&A standpoint, not everyone is going into the office anymore. We work in a hybrid environment. Can we sublease some of our space? And then the final lever for us a lot of times is headcount. I think that's true for most companies. And so we did a pretty extensive benchmarking analysis within our industry to see, where are we at from a headcount perspective versus some of our peers? And what does that look like, even just versus the 50th percentile of our benchmark, not even best in class? And we found that we were definitely behind benchmark. We had more headcount costs than a lot of our peers. And a lot of that has to do with lack of automation. I think when you pull together, almost 50 acquisitions over a 15-year period, it can be tough to get all that data cleaned up and automated and have streamlined processes. And so that's something we took a hard look at and said, okay, well, if we're going to get to these benchmark targets, we're going to need to make some investments in our systems and really upgrade, add automation. And so we can get there. And so I think, going through budgeting processes like that, where you're pulling together a forecast and you don't get an answer you like, and you kind of have to go back to the business and say, hey, we need to pivot. We really need to hone in on, these three things. It's challenging. And then it's even more challenging when you get to that last headcount lever. No one wants to do it. It's always hard conversations, but a lot of businesses have pulled that lever in the last 12 months. We've seen a lot of layoffs in tech and even other industries. And so ultimately we did end up doing some small headcount actions as part of getting to our budget that year and setting us up to be in a place of good liquidity and, going concern, a place where we have enough capital to invest for growth and things like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of our audience is locked in and they can 100% relate to what you're talking about here. And it's making me think about, so you started out in audit and then operational accounting, and thinking about what you dealt with there versus coming to FP&A and what you're looking at here. A lot of it sounds like it could be very stressful, and certainly audit and accounting can as well. What was it about FP&A that made you drawn to the finance side, and how would you describe it to someone who didn't know what FP&A is?
On the accounting side, it was a really great foundation for my career and for any career in finance, learning how to read financial statements, how they all relate together, learning kind of the ins and outs of the business from an operational standpoint, understanding how decisions you make, what is the actual impact on your financial statements? How does that hit the P&L or the balance sheet or your cash flow? I think what was exciting for me to move into finance was you kind of get to be more forward looking A lot of times accounting, you're accounting for things that have already happened, right? My favorite part about being in finance is being able to kind of look at what's coming next and advise the business on what you're seeing, being able to communicate with the leadership team, understanding what they want to do strategically versus what you think financially the business will look like a year or 2 years from now, kind of working together on better decision making for the business today to set ourselves up well for the future. That's definitely what drew me into finance, was kind of the more forward-looking aspect of it. I think if I was going to explain an FP&A role to someone who didn't know what that was, I would kind of lean that way and say, yeah, we work with business leaders to predict what the financials of the business will look like, and this really the success of the business will look like based on leadership's strategy and their goals. And we set financial targets for them based on what that strategy and those goals are. And we'll measure them on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis and let them know, how they're doing against those targets. How close are they getting to, what they've defined as success? And if there's gaps, we help them close those gaps. If there's a shift in the strategy because of something that happened internally or externally and the market has shifted, what pivots does the business need to make in order to set new targets or new goals, and really just aligning the financial targets to really what the business wants to achieve.
Thinking about and hearing you describe the way your team is set up and thinking about the data that you have and that you're already using predictive analytics, telecom companies are generally going to be a little more advanced than a lot of other companies. I think it's just because of the tech nature of it. Maybe backing up and as you talk to industry peers, and maybe these are as they relate to you, but I think about where we are right now with kind of at the cusp of whatever is going to come next with generative AI, but even, AI in general has been used for years in machine learning and, predictive analytics and BI and all that. We're kind of on the cusp of another shift, looking at whether it's there or in general. What's your sense of what the biggest challenges are right now for just FP&A as a field? Maybe the biggest challenges and opportunities as we're sitting at this right on the brink of, obviously we've had all kinds of tools that have increased automation over the years, been able to do more and more with data, but it feels like that's about to shift even more. What are you seeing and what are your thoughts about where we are today and where FP&A may be headed in the near future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think right now it's a little bit hard to tell, but we definitely are trying to keep our thumb on the pulse. We've kicked off initiatives with our internal IT team to help us from a finance perspective with predictive warning signs or, early warning signs from a finance perspective. So understanding, what some of our price times quantity drivers are, like what really drives the outcomes of our business, what drives expense or revenue, and understanding earlier in the month, ahead of accounting close or anything else, what can we expect our costs to be? One example of that, it's an account for us. It's hard to forecast. It's emergency repair on our network. That's driven by, if there's a lot of construction, which there's been a ton of investment and government funding for infrastructure around the US. And when there's crews, repairing roads or digging up sidewalks, a lot of times they'll inadvertently cut our network and we have to go out and repair it. And that's expensive. Sometimes we can go after the person who cut it, but a lot of times it could even be like a squirrel chew on a telephone pole. And so we measure that by number of events versus cost per event. And in the winter months, it tends to be slower because there's less construction, there's less cuts on the network. In the summer, it tends to spike, and it's a big deal for us. And so something we're trying to do is implement, how many events have we had on the network? What do we think the cost per event is? Some can be more expensive than others. It's a really wide range, but getting insight into that, on a daily or weekly basis versus waiting for after accounting close to understand what that expense looks like is really helpful for us. The sooner we can identify that, the sooner we can implement initiatives to mitigate that spend. Like one would be internally locating our network for companies. So, people usually, you're supposed to call before you dig, tell them where our network is so they don't hit it. That's just one very specific small example. But going really deep into our financials and understanding what the drivers are so we can work with IT and say, hey, can you implement a model for us that will pull from these 3 data sources and then tell us what we can expect from a finance standpoint whenever we want, pull up a dashboard and see where we're at.
And all these data sources you're talking about there are internal data?
Yeah, primarily internal data, network downtime, all of our network stats is in a different system than maybe the system where people are putting in PRs or reporting events, things like that. So
I always think about external factors. You can track your historical information and things like construction and seasonality around that. And I think of as machine learning models are able to process a lot more than what we used to do in Excel. Do you ever look at factoring in external data, whether it's new construction or macroeconomic factors? Do you try to incorporate any of that into any of your models?
yeah, that's definitely something we do more on the pricing side right now anyways. We do look at some of those macro factors on the expense side. There's no specific data source that we've been using to pull from. It's an assumption that we make internally. But AI is really interesting. Not only are businesses trying to figure out how to use and harness that, but it's actually a huge opportunity for Zayo. If you think about AI, you've seen the proof points in NVIDIA, the chips, their results have just skyrocketed. And then, well, you need a data center to house those chips, right? And so you see all the hyperscalers building these huge data center campuses across the United States. But if you build a data center and it's not connected to a network, it's just a box with a bunch of stuff in it. And so that's where Zayo comes in to provide that network connectivity and the bandwidth for those hyperscalers to actually transmit the data between their data center campuses or corporate headquarters. And the amount of data that's used to run these AI models and machine learning models isn't all housed in one data center campus, right? So data is going between multiple data center campuses, multiple sources. And so all of that rides on a fiber network, essentially. And so we're actually trying to figure out how do we capture these kind of macro tailwinds of AI from a top line standpoint at Zayo. How do we capture that demand? And we're definitely seeing it in discussions that we're having with some of the hyperscalers. If you think about a fiber network, you have fiber strands, and maybe back in the day, a customer wanted one fiber pair or 4 fiber pairs. Now, some of these customers who move tons of data around, they want 144 fiber pairs. It's just insane how much that's grown, how much more data people are transmitting, and it's just an indicator of where they think this is going to go and how much data they think they're going to need to be moving between data centers and campuses.
Yeah, it's funny as you say that. I'm picturing like the Moore's law, the scale of the growth in compute power, and I picture as you're talking about the increased network traffic around AI in these data centers. I feel like you're actually seeing a chart that is showing the growth of AI with that, and thinking about everything you've said about what Zayo's doing, and knowing telecom tends to be technology leaders in their reporting and what they're doing in the back office, because certainly they've been using machine learning for years for traffic routing and all that, and that sort of can bleed over into the other departments, into financial modeling and all that. So I imagine you guys are probably talking a lot about Gen AI, as I guess we all are. But how are you guys approaching? And maybe I won't limit it to just generative AI, but we talked a little bit about machine learning earlier, but how are you guys in finance using AI today? And are you doing any sort of experimentation? How are you looking at generative AI and how it may change what you do in FP&A?
It's something we're definitely looking at. How can we get more accurate? How can we be faster in our reporting? I think, we have analysts that do work that a machine could learn how to do, or we could, build an AI model and teach it how to do that. And that's something that we want to do. I mean, as an analyst, it gives you actually a lot more opportunities to figure out what's really going on in the business. Anything where an analyst is, just collecting data, massaging the data, and then basically reporting the weather, we would rather have a machine doing that and use that analyst to actually look at what's happening, go talk to the business and figure out how to make the business better. How can we do something better? How can we price these services better? How can we mitigate churn? How can we eliminate our costs, shrink our technical space in this market? There's a lot that we can do to kind of use ML and AI to give us the weather reporting. We spend so much time doing that manually. How can we teach a model to do that so that we can go take what we learn from it and actually implement changes in the business to make us more efficient?
We do like to share a little bit about personal side with our guests. And as FP&A professionals, talk about what our interests are and kind of what we're doing. I'd like to spend the last few minutes talking a bit about changes that are going on right now and seeing how you've moved from audit to the operational accounting, now to FP&A. What's top of mind for you right now for your career? What are you trying to learn or master at this point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think right now, something that's very top of mind for me and something that I haven't had a ton of experience in historically is capital markets. Here at Zayo, we have $9 billion of public debt, and some of that, matures in the next several years. And so we're starting to look at refinancing strategies. There's been a couple fiber companies, primarily fiber to the home companies, that have gone out and done an asset-backed securitization in order to raise debt, which is kind of newer in our industry. Companies like Zayo, we're not fiber to the home, but haven't really done it yet. So we're figuring out, can we go raise ABS debt to replace or pay down some of our traditional high yield debt? Can we refinance some of our capital stack doing that? And so I think that's been a good experience for me, talking to banks, kind of learning about that side of finance. It's a little bit different than traditional FP&A, has been really exciting. And I think the other thing too is just being in the position that I'm in now, kind of taking on mentors, honestly, and working with younger professionals in their career who have questions about, what can their trajectory look like? What experiences should they be getting in order to be successful or meet their goals? And I think being a female in a finance leadership position is, a little bit unique. But I think being here, being a role model, mentoring young women in finance and young men in finance, who want to get to the next level is definitely something that's top of mind for me as well.
That's great. And I know also you're quite explicit, as many of our listeners are, about wanting to be a CFO. What is your approach to realizing this goal? And you talked about the mentoring and about learning more. What else are you doing in this vein?
I'm definitely not shy about it. When I started my career, when people would ask you, what do you want to be in 5 or 10 years, what are your career goals? I would always just say CFO. I'd kind of throw it out there. It's obviously a big goal. And early in my career, I didn't have a ton of experience, but it was something to help guide me through each role that I took on. I know a lot of CFOs started out in public accounting. And so, I thought, what a good place to start. And I think just letting people know that there was a goal out there kept me kind of in the back of their mind as roles started to open up. I took that operational accounting role, but at the time I told my CFO, who was my boss, I said, yeah, I'll do this role, but I actually want to be in finance. I don't want to be in accounting forever. And sure enough, about a year later, something opened up in finance. And he said, oh, I already know Tory wants to do this. I'm going to ask her if she wants this role. And so just having that out there keeps you top of mind for other people and for advocates or other people in the business who are making those decisions. If I would have never said that and I kind of held it close to the chest, that finance role would have opened and maybe he would have never thought of me because he didn't know I wanted to be in finance. And so I think it's really important, even if the goal seems, so far out there and maybe even unattainable at the time, you don't need to be shy about it. If you don't get there in the end, that's okay too, if you change your mind along the way. But I think what's important for me now is working with my leadership team or other mentors that I have to figure out where are the gaps in my experience and what do I need to kind of get to that next level or get to the CFO level. And I think, for me, 6 months ago, it was that capital markets experience. And so now that, it's fortuitous that Zayo is coming up, we need to start thinking about refinancing our debt maturities. And I'm now getting the opportunity to work on that project and get some experience on the capital market side. So I think definitely voice, what your goals are, ask people, where are my weak spots and have them help you fill in those gaps too. Say, hey, I want to be in this project when this comes up and really advocate for yourself to get there.
Yeah. And it sounds like, you've got a clear plan and you see the path and you're able to advocate very well for yourself. And I know you mentioned that you'd mentioned to a former boss about wanting to move into finance. Is there someone, is it that person? Is there someone in your career? It could be a person or a training program or a book or something that has really had the biggest influence on your finance career?
Yeah, I would say that boss has probably been one of my biggest mentors and advocates. It definitely helps to have someone within your organization that you can relate to, that you work well with, who's in the room when, bigger decisions are being made and can help get you some of those bigger opportunities. I've been part of other mentorship programs where I was assigned a mentor. And those were beneficial for me, but I would say those people actually they didn't have the biggest impact on my career. I think a lot of times those mentorship relationships, the ones that come naturally, are the ones that work the best. It's kind of hard just to, assign two people together at a company and go through the motions versus finding someone that can really be your advocate. And it's a two-way street, right? You got to work hard and keep the relationship going and help the mentor understand, what you want to do and how they can help you versus expecting someone to kind of just step into that role without really, understanding what you want to do and where you want to go. It's definitely a two-way street there to kind of build those mentorship relationships and have advocates for you throughout your career.
This is always my favorite question, whether I'm a hosting or a guest on a podcast, because you hear some interesting things along the way. What is something that maybe not many people know about you, something that we can't easily find online or that not on your LinkedIn page?
Yeah, I actually am a big golfer. Today I'm a 1 handicap. I actually played at the University of Denver. I love playing golf. I play most weekends when the weather's nice. When I was younger, actually, I went to a tournament. It's called the Women's Western Junior. For anyone who follows women's golf, a lot of the big names on the LPGA had won that at some point in their career. It's a match play tournament. And I was invited to the tournament. I went. It's a play-in, a 36-hole play-in, and then you get seeded into a bracket. It's match play from there on out. And I actually, I thought I would get out of the 36-hole play-in. I did. I made it into the bracket system, but I didn't think I was going to go very far. If you keep winning, it's 2 matches a day. And the tournament, if you get to the last match, it ends up being like a 6 or 7 day tournament. Well, I only brought enough clothes to get to like the 4th day. And I kept winning my matches. And so, I got to the end and I won my last match. My dad was with me. It was like in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. We had to drive like 40 minutes to the nearest sporting goods store so I could get more clothes because it was like 100 degrees out and all my clothes I had worn were sweaty and gross. And, they asked me at the end of the tournament, like, so-and-so who's on the LPGA tour, she comes into every tournament expecting to win. Was that your mindset this week? And I said, actually, no, it wasn't. I didn't bring enough clothes to make it to the championship round. So, I actually think, golf has helped me a ton in my career. And that moment in my junior golf career really was a mindset shift for me that the sky's the limit. And it really blew the lid off, like in all aspects of my life. I think my golf game got a little better, but also my grades in school got better. The goals that I set for myself were just a little bit higher. That was a real turning point for me. And I think it's, my new goal of CFO someday. It's helped me just as kind of a guidepost and a mindset really keep working towards that and knowing that the sky's the limit.
Okay, Tory, now is the question we ask everyone. I think I know what the answer is going to be just based on how many people I've heard it answer this, but you may surprise me. What is your favorite Excel function and why?
Well, I don't know if you've gotten this one before, but I would say my favorite Excel function is actually not an Excel function at all. It's how do we get it out of Excel and automate it into a system? That would be my favorite outcome. But I think if we need to go with an Excel function, we have kind of an inside joke here on the Zayo finance team with the index match. If anyone wants to get into the Zayo Group March Madness brackets or any other kind of login games, the password will be index match for all of those.
You know what? I loved your answer because I'm constantly preaching about automation and getting data into the places where we can do the most with it. So I actually really like your first answer a whole lot better. But the reality is, I feel like it'll be 50 years from now and we'll still be using Excel. It'll be because it's sort of the base foundation of all of it. But as much as you can move out of it. And yeah, so index match and VLOOKUP is the other really popular one. And actually, when I was a guest on this show last year or whenever it was, I couldn't get beyond VLOOKUP. It's just, I thought about but I guess if you're doing index match too, that's pretty similar. But I was just thinking about what am I most frequently doing in Excel. So.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Well, Tory, this has been great. I've really appreciated you sharing your time and being on, and wish you the best of luck. And thank you for being on FP&A today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.